What's going on YouTube? Today I'm going to be replacing a throttle cable on my son's Yamaha PW50. At one point I had removed the oil injection system out of this bike. I've now reinstalled it, and today I'm going to be reinstalling a OEM throttle cable. Overall, the throttle cable makes up about 5 part numbers total. I chose to buy 2 of the part numbers from RockyMountainATV.com. I got part numbers 8 and 9, which gave me a new cable up at the handlebars, and then also a new one that would run down to the carburetor. All right, let's get started on the replacement. So the first step I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open up this housing here where the one cable becomes 2, or Y's off, and I'm gonna put my 2 new pieces on, and then we'll start tearing the bike apart. This would probably be a pain if you try to replace just one of these parts while it's on the bike. Most likely you would probably want to remove, the one going to the carburetor and probably the one going to the oil pump, so these cables would have some play on them to take this apart. So the first thing we're going to do, try to get this end off, and like there you can see it's got this little plastic piece which I'm assuming comes, yep, it's already in that new cable, and it's Y's off into this. I slid out the cable that was going to the carburetor, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinsert the new one. Just push on it, and you can feel it kind of bottom out in there, and you'll know it's all the way in. Feed the cable through a little bit. For the one that's going to go up to our throttle housing up on the handlebars, I noticed this little plastic piece was dry, didn't have any grease on it, and the one that came out did. It just had a light film, so I added a little bit of grease to it before I put this back together. There's 2 little grooves on here to slide these cables into. It does not matter which one you put in where. It'll all straighten out once it gets inside. Slide down, and reattach this cap. It snaps on there, it's pretty tight. And grommet. Now it's time to remove the seat on the bike. What you're going to want to do is remove these 2 10mm bolts under the rear fender. Once those are out, then you can slide the seat off. The next thing we're going to want to do is remove the exhaust off the bike. This will provide us enough room to get into the oil injection pump that's down in there, and we'll be able to remove the cable. There are a total of 3 10mm bolts. There's one here, and then there's going to be 2 up here on the header here. You don't actually need to remove these all the way. You just have to loosen them up enough, and then this header will just slide off. And then here in the middle, there's going to be a 12mm bolt located right here, and then this silencer pipe will just slide right out. Now I'll remove the airbox. Just 1 Phillips head screw. Pop this off. Remove another Phillips head screw for the cover over the oil injection pump. Now to remove the cable out of the little throttle housing here, what you're going to do is there's 2 Phillips head screws on the bottom. You need to remove both of those. Should be able to turn this just enough and slide it out. Pull this grommet back and then slide it out. Here's the oil injection pump and the cable running into it. And what this does is it just turns it when you turn the throttle and premixes your gas. So what we're going to do is slide this around. Trying to get the cable to slide out. I was lucky enough to get it first try there, but you might want to use some needle nose pliers. That would probably help. To remove the cable out of the carburetor, what you're going to want to do is remove the one Phillips head screw on top. I've had this carburetor open more times than I care to share. There's going to be a couple springs inside. Alright, so the trick here is to compress this spring and get this cable to pop out this groove. And then slide this off. Like such. This piece right here will stay attached, and what we're going to need to do is loosen this up enough, and then this cable will slide out. Alright. So now I've disconnected all three ends of this cable, and at this point it's just time to start fishing the cable out to remove it. Pay attention to where, you know, how it was routed, the original cable, and we'll try to keep that route with the new one. I started to route the cable down through the frame, and the first thing I hooked up was the oil injection pump. What I would do before you put it in here, keep it loose, run the cable down, and hook it on here. You don't need to pull, turn this to help you out. Just put it back in its slot and then wrap the cable around, then set this. I would do it first before you hook it up to the throttle housing up on the handlebars or the carburetor. Around to the carburetor, I hooked up the cable on this end. Focus. Hooked up the cable on this end and just left this loose, and I will show how to reattach that spring back in. You're going to want to put the spring on, compress the spring, make sure it's seated. This little groove right here actually needs to go on the far side of the carburetor. So we're going to spin this around and be gentle when you slide it down through. If you start to get hung up, I would try to retry before you scratch this. You'll see a little pin on the far side, and you need to line that up and make sure it seats perfectly. See there how it dropped below? It's lined up. Going to insert the cable back into this throttle housing. Pushing those grommets. Slip that on top. Once the end of the cable's through the housing here, what we're going to do is slide the end of that cable into the groove here on the throttle tube. You can actually do this before you put it on the bars. There we go. And then just slide it down. And what you want to do is, once you get it together, is put your two screws back in the bottom. So at this point, the cable is basically installed. Give the throttle a couple turns, nothing's hanging up, nothing's sticking. It sounds good. So what I'm going to do is start to reassemble the bike, and I'll have my son go test it out and make sure it runs good.